It was a chilly Sunday morning when my mom, Diane, called me into the living room. She had that look on her face, the one that meant she was up to something, and I already knew I was about to get pulled into one of her big ideas. Our dog, Bruno, was sitting at her feet, wagging his tail like he already knew something exciting was about to happen. At first, I figured she just wanted me to take him for a walk or maybe help with some training. But then she gave me this strange smile, the kind that usually meant trouble, and told me to grab my phone. "We're going to film something with Bruno today," she said, her voice all casual, but there was something in her eyes that made me hesitate. I thought it was just another one of her social media projects. She loved posting videos of Bruno wearing ridiculous costumes or doing silly tricks, and she was always talking about how dog videos go viral. But this time, she seemed different, like she had a real plan, and I wasn't sure I wanted to be part of it. "What kind of video?" I asked, glancing at Bruno, who just kept wagging his tail, totally clueless. "You'll see," she said, brushing off my question like it didn't matter. "Just trust me, it'll be fun." But I knew my mom. I knew the way she got when she was really determined to do something, and I could already tell this wasn't going to be a simple, light-hearted video. She had this way of making things sound like no big deal, but before you knew it, you were knee-deep in whatever she'd come up with, wondering how you got there. She walked into the other room to grab her supplies, and I sat on the couch with Bruno, running my hand over his soft fur. He looked up at me with those big brown eyes, completely happy and unaware that something was off. "What do you think she's up to, buddy?" I whispered, and Bruno tilted his head like he always did when he didn't understand. A few minutes later, my mom came back, holding a small box and her phone. She set them down on the table, and that weird smile of hers widened. "All right," she said, clapping her hands together. "Let's get started." I still had no idea what we were actually doing, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just some casual Sunday morning project. Something about the way she was acting made me uneasy. I watched as she carefully opened the small box. Inside were a few random-looking things: a colorful bandana, a squeaky toy shaped like a taco, and a small tripod for her phone. Bruno perked up at the sight of the toy, his tail wagging even harder. "So, what exactly are we doing?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my stomach was already tightening with nerves. My mom just gave me that glinting look, the one she got when she was really excited about something. "Just trust me," she said again. "It's going to be adorable. Bruno is going to love it, and we'll have something fun to post." I wanted to believe her, but she was being so vague, and I knew from experience that meant there was more to this than she was letting on. It wasn't the first time she'd dragged me into one of her ambitious projects. Last month, she tried to teach Bruno to sing along to a pop song for a challenge, and it had turned into an hour of barking and chaos. But this felt different. The way she kept brushing off my questions, the way she was already so prepared with props, it made me uneasy. She started setting up the tripod and adjusting the angle, humming to herself like everything was totally normal. "You know," she said over her shoulder, "these kinds of videos can go viral. People eat this stuff up. We could even start making some real money from it." I sighed, leaning back into the couch. My mom had always been obsessed with going viral, as if internet fame was the answer to everything. Ever since my dad left, she had been juggling side hustles, always looking for the next big thing. And I got it. I really did. But using Bruno to do it? That just didn't sit right with me. "Can you at least tell me what the plan is?" I asked again, trying to sound more supportive. She finally looked at me, her expression softening just a little. It's just a little skit, she said. You and Bruno are going to act out a scene. It'll be cute. Trust me. A skit? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Like what? She still didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up the bandana and tied it around Bruno's neck. You'll see, she said, her voice almost teasing now. I glanced at Bruno, who looked as happy as ever, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was about to be way more complicated than I'd signed up for. As she finished tying the bandana, she started positioning the tripod again, making sure everything was just right. The way she moved, so focused and deliberate, made me feel like I was the only one in the room questioning this whole thing. Bruno, as usual, was just wagging his tail and chewing on the toy. Okay, she finally said, standing back and studying the setup. Here's the deal. We're going to act like Bruno is solving a mystery. You're the sidekick, and he's the hero. A mystery? I asked, my voice full of doubt. Yeah, she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Like a detective story. People love this kind of stuff. It's quirky, it's fun, and it'll show off Bruno's personality. Trust me, this could blow up online. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the way she kept emphasizing the word viral made my stomach twist. This wasn't just about having fun. She had a goal, and she wasn't telling me everything. All right, I said slowly, trying to play along. So, what's the mystery? She grinned, clearly excited that I wasn't fighting her on this anymore. It's simple. Bruno is a detective trying to find his missing taco toy. I looked down at Bruno, who was happily chewing on the very same toy. You mean the one he already has? No, she said, waving her hand like I was missing the point. That's just the setup. We'll take it away, hide it somewhere, and film him searching for it. Then you'll help him along the way, like his partner. It sounded harmless enough, but the way she kept brushing off my concerns made me uneasy. There had to be more to this. As she explained the rest of the plan, I started to notice little details that didn't quite add up. She had already picked specific spots to film, like she'd been planning this for days. There was even a small bag of props she had stashed away, including a pair of plastic sunglasses she wanted Bruno to wear for the big reveal. The more she talked, the more I realized how much effort she had put into this. This wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment idea. It was something she had been thinking about for a while. And that's when I started to wonder, why? Why did this video matter so much? Why was she acting like it was more important than just a fun little game with Bruno? Something about the way she was pushing so hard made me feel like I was missing something, like there was another layer to this I hadn't figured out yet. Why does it feel like there's more to this than you're telling me? I finally asked, narrowing my eyes at her. She froze for just a second, barely noticeable. Then she laughed it off. Don't overthink it, she said. It's just for fun. But that hesitation, that tiny moment where she didn't know what to say, that told me everything I needed to know. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about making a cute video. I stood there, watching my mom adjust the tripod again, feeling that weird knot in my stomach tighten. Something about the way she was so focused, so deliberate, made this whole thing feel bigger than just a silly dog video. Bruno sat next to me, his tail thumping happily on the floor, completely unaware that anything was strange. I wished I could be as clueless as him, but I wasn't. I knew my mom, and I knew when she was hiding something. She kept brushing off my questions like they didn't matter, acting like this was just a fun little project, but I wasn't convinced. I kept looking at the setup, the way she had planned every detail, and it didn't feel random. It felt rehearsed. Like she had thought this all through way before she even called me into the living room. That was what really unsettled me. It wasn't just that she wanted to film a cute video, it was that she needed to. Like there was something more riding on it. All right, she said, standing back and surveying her work. Let's get started. I glanced at Bruno, who was already wagging his tail, ready for whatever was coming next. I, on the other hand, wasn't sure I wanted to go along with this anymore. But I also knew my mom. And if I backed out now, she wouldn't just let it go. She had that determined look, the one that meant she wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted. Okay, so what do I do? I asked, trying to sound casual, even though my stomach was twisting. She grinned, clearly excited that I was finally cooperating. Easy, she said. Bruno's a detective, right? He's solving a mystery. You're going to help him. Just follow my lead and it'll all come together. That didn't really answer my question, but I nodded anyway. I didn't feel like arguing. She handed me a small piece of paper, and when I looked at it, I saw a string of random numbers scribbled across it. What's this? I asked, frowning. It's a clue, she said, like that explained everything. Just act surprised when Bruno finds it. I stared at her, waiting for more, but she just adjusted her phone and motioned for me to get into position. I sighed, crouching next to Bruno. All right, buddy, I muttered, scratching behind his ears. Let's see what this is all about. My mom hit record and suddenly I was on the spot. What's that, Bruno? I said, playing along. My mom nodded, encouraging me to keep going. Bruno sniffed at the paper, uninterested, so I picked it up and made a big show of looking shocked. Whoa, what's this? Numbers? What do you think it means, Bruno? My mom beamed like I'd just nailed my lines in a Hollywood movie. Perfect, she said, stopping the recording. I stood up, shaking my head. Mom, why numbers? Shouldn't it be something more, I don't know, related to his toy? She waved me off. It's called building suspense, she said. People love a good mystery. I frowned. Something about this still wasn't sitting right. But why numbers? I pressed. What do they mean? It'll all make sense later, she said, her voice a little too light, a little too forced. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just making this up as she went along. She already knew exactly what those numbers meant. That was when the weird feeling in my gut turned into something heavier. I watched her as she fiddled with her phone, checking something before quickly tucking it into her pocket. Bruno nudged my hand, oblivious to my growing unease. I looked down at him, at his goofy, happy face, and for a second, I almost convinced myself that I was overthinking everything. But then my mom spoke again, and the way she said it made my skin crawl. You know, she said, adjusting the tripod again, these kinds of videos can go viral. People love this stuff. Cute dogs, a little mystery, some suspense. If we do this right, it could blow up. I sighed, rubbing my temple. Mom, is that what this is really about? Going viral? Why not? She said, a little too quickly. We could actually make some real money from this. I groaned, dropping onto the couch. I knew it. You're trying to turn Bruno into some kind of internet star. She rolled her eyes. Oh, come on, don't be dramatic. It's just a video. Then why does it feel like you're hiding something? I shot back. Her expression flickered for a split second. It was so fast that I almost missed it, but I didn't. I saw the hesitation, the tiny moment of uncertainty, before she forced that easy smile back onto her face. You're overthinking it, she said again, but this time her voice wasn't as confident as before. Bruno barked, wagging his tail, breaking the tension for a moment. My mom took that as a cue to move on. Come on, she said, grabbing a small bag of props. Let's set up the next clue. I watched her as she walked out of the room, my mind racing. Something about this wasn't adding up. The numbers, the way she was dodging my questions, the way she was so determined to make this video perfect. It wasn't just about social media. It couldn't be. I turned to Bruno, who was still sitting there, happy as ever. "What do you think, buddy?" I whispered. "Something about this feels off, doesn't it?" Bruno just tilted his head, his ears perking up like he was trying to understand. I sighed, scratching his head. "Yeah," I muttered. "Me too." I followed my mom outside, still trying to shake the weird feeling that had been nagging at me since we started this whole video thing. Bruno trotted ahead, his tail wagging as he sniffed around the backyard, completely unaware that anything strange was going on. My mom was focused, more focused than I had ever seen her during one of her social media projects. She was setting up the next part of the mystery, adjusting the camera angle just right and pulling something from her bag of props. I crossed my arms, watching her. "Okay, so what now?" I asked, trying to sound casual. But I knew she could hear the suspicion in my voice. She barely looked at me as she spoke. "Now we bury the next clue," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I frowned. "Bury it?" She pointed to a pile of leaves near the fence. "Just scatter these a little. Make it look natural. Then Bruno will sniff around and discover the clue." I sighed, but did what she asked. I kicked the leaves around, making it look like they had just blown into a messy pile, while my mom dug a little spot underneath. She pulled something from her bag, a small, crumpled piece of paper, and placed it carefully under the leaves before stepping back. "All right, let's do this," she said, clapping her hands together. I crouched next to Bruno, pretending to whisper to him. "Okay, buddy, time to solve the mystery." My mom hit record, and I motioned toward the leaves. "What's that, Bruno?" I asked, playing along. Bruno sniffed the pile, tail wagging, and then started digging. My mom nodded in approval. "Perfect," she whispered. Then suddenly, Bruno stopped. His tail lowered just slightly, and his sniffing became more focused. Then he started digging harder, pushing leaves and dirt aside. My mom's smile faltered. "What's he doing?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "Just let him go," she said, her voice quieter now. Bruno kept digging, his paws scraping against something solid. Then, to my surprise, he unearthed something completely different from what my mom had planted. A small, black notebook. My breath caught. My mom stiffened. "Bruno, no," she said quickly, stepping forward. But I had already reached out and grabbed it. The cover was worn, almost like it had been buried there for a long time. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the rough texture under my fingers. "What is this?" I asked, my voice low. My mom didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced around like she was checking to see if anyone was watching us. That made my stomach drop. "Mom," I pressed, gripping the notebook tighter. "What is this?" She finally looked at me, her face pale. "It's nothing," she said too quickly. "Just put it back." But I wasn't buying it, not for a second. "Why?" I asked, flipping it open before she could stop me. The pages were filled with handwritten notes. Some were messy, almost scribbled like someone had been writing them in a hurry. Others were neatly organized into lists, but what really made my skin crawl were the names and the numbers. They looked almost like dates or codes, but none of it made sense to me. My heartbeat picked up. "Mom, what is this?" I asked again. She took a deep breath, like she was trying to keep herself calm. "It's complicated," she finally said. "Just give it to me." I shook my head. Number not until you tell me why this was buried in our backyard. She opened her mouth like she was going to argue, but then her phone buzzed. The sound made both of us freeze. She hesitated for just a second before grabbing it and glancing at the screen. I caught the briefest glimpse of the message before she tilted it away. Ready for tonight. Don't forget the files. My whole body went cold. Mom, I said slowly, my voice barely more than a whisper. What files? She locked her phone and shoved it into her pocket. It's nothing, she said again, but her voice was even shakier now. Just give me the notebook. I took a step back, gripping it tighter. Who sent that message? I demanded. She didn't answer. She just held out her hand, her eyes pleading now. Please, Olivia, just trust me. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I looked down at the notebook again, flipping through the pages, searching for something, anything, that would explain why my mom was acting this way. And then I saw it. One of the numbers in the notebook matched the numbers on the piece of paper she had given me earlier. My stomach dropped. This isn't just for the video, I whispered, finally putting it all together. This is real, isn't it? She didn't answer. And that silence was all I needed. My hands started shaking. Mom, I said, my voice barely steady. What did you get us into? She swallowed hard, glancing around again. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, she said, We need to go inside. Now. But before we could move, Bruno started growling. A low, deep sound I had never heard from him before. He was staring at the fence, his ears back, his whole body tense. My heart pounded as I turned to look. And that's when I saw it. A shadow, standing just beyond the fence, watching us. Bruno's growl sent a chill down my spine. I had never heard him sound like that before, and when I followed his gaze, my heart started hammering in my chest. There was someone standing just beyond the fence, still and silent, watching us. I felt frozen for a second, my brain trying to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. The figure wasn't moving, just standing there like they had been waiting. My mom went rigid next to me, and that's when I knew for sure. This wasn't some random person passing by. This had something to do with her, with the notebook, with whatever it was she had been hiding. My breath caught in my throat as the figure finally moved, stepping forward just slightly, enough for me to see they were wearing dark clothes, a hat pulled low over their face. They weren't just standing there for no reason. They were here for something. My mom grabbed my arm, her grip tight. Inside, she whispered urgently. I didn't argue. I clutched the notebook and turned, nearly tripping over my own feet as we hurried toward the back door. Bruno barked, loud and fierce, but I barely heard it over the sound of my own pulse pounding in my ears. My mom fumbled with the door handle before shoving it open, practically pushing me inside. I turned to look back just as the figure at the fence took another step forward. That was enough for me. I slammed the door shut behind us, locking it with shaky hands. "Mom!" I gasped, still trying to process what just happened. "Who was that?" She didn't answer. She ran to the front of the house, peeking through the blinds like she was expecting more people to be out there. "Mom," I repeated, louder this time. "Who was that?" She turned to me, her face pale, her hands clenched into fists. "We need to leave," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "Now." My stomach twisted. "Leave?" I repeated. "Where are we supposed to go?" "Somewhere safe," she said quickly, already moving through the house, grabbing her car keys, stuffing her phone into her jacket pocket. "Just get Bruno and let's go." But I didn't move. "Mom, stop! You need to tell me what's going on." She turned sharply, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name: fear, frustration, maybe even regret. "I don't have time to explain right now, Olivia," she said. "Please, just trust me." But how was I supposed to trust her when everything she had been saying all morning had been a lie? First, it was just a video. Then it was a game. Then it turned out to be some kind of secret message buried in the backyard. And now there were people showing up at our house? "No," I said, standing my ground. "I'm not moving until you tell me what's going on." My mom clenched her jaw, looking like she wanted to argue, but before she could say anything, Bruno started barking again, this time louder, more frantic. I turned just in time to see movement through the front window. Another person. And this time, they weren't just standing there. They were coming toward the house. My mom didn't hesitate. She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the front door. "We don't have time for this," she said sharply. "Get in the car. Now." My legs moved on instinct, even though my mind was still spinning. She threw open the door, and I barely had time to grab Bruno's collar before we rushed outside. The air felt thick, heavy, like something was about to go very, very wrong. The driveway was empty except for our car, but I knew better than to think we were alone. My mom shoved the keys into the ignition, her hands shaking as she turned them. The engine roared to life just as I saw the first figure step into the street. I sucked in a breath. There were two of them now, one in front of the house, one moving toward the side, closing in. My mom didn't wait. She slammed the car into reverse, backing out of the driveway so fast the tires screeched. "Mom!" I yelped as she spun the wheel, sending us flying down the road. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. I twisted in my seat, looking back, half expecting them to be chasing after us. But they weren't. They just stood there, watching us go, like they knew we had nowhere to run. My hands were shaking as I clutched Bruno close to me. "Mom," I whispered, my voice unsteady. "Where are we going?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were locked on the road, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. "The cabin," she finally said. My stomach dropped. "The cabin?" I repeated. "As in Grandpa's old place? Why would we go there?" She exhaled through her nose, gripping the wheel tighter. "Because it's the only place they won't look for us. Not yet." I didn't like the way she said that, like she knew they would find us eventually. I looked down at the notebook still clutched in my hands, flipping through the pages, searching for something, anything, that would help me make sense of what was happening. "Mom," I said again, my voice softer this time. "What did you do?" She didn't answer. She just kept driving. And for the first time in my life, I realized I might not really know who my mother was at all. The drive to the cabin felt like the longest of my life. My mom didn't say a word the whole time, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly I thought she might break it. Bruno sat in the back seat, quiet for once, his ears perked up like he could feel the tension in the air. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, my mind racing with questions that I wasn't sure I wanted the answers to. Every few minutes, I glanced over at my mom, waiting for her to say something, to explain why we were running, why those people were at our house, why she had buried a notebook full of strange names and numbers in the backyard, like it was some kind of buried treasure. But she just kept driving, her jaw clenched, her eyes locked on the empty road stretching ahead of us. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Mom," I said, my voice sharp, "tell me the truth. What's in the notebook?" She didn't answer at first, just let out a slow breath through her nose, like she was debating whether she should finally tell me or not. but I wasn't going to let her stay quiet this time. Who are those people? I pressed. Why were they at our house? Why did we just leave everything behind? What have you gotten us into? She gripped the wheel even tighter. I didn't want you to find out like this, she muttered, more to herself than to me. Well, too late for that, I snapped, holding up the notebook. What is this? What do these numbers mean? She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the notebook for the briefest second before looking back at the road. It's evidence, she finally said, her voice quieter now. Evidence of what? I asked, my heart picking up speed. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Deals, she said, vaguely. Illegal ones. Transactions. Things that weren't supposed to be documented. I stared at her. And you just... What? Had this buried in our backyard? She nodded slowly. I didn't know where else to keep it, she admitted. I thought it would be safe there. But now they know I have it. My stomach twisted. Who are they? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then said, People I used to work with. I blinked. Wait, what? She swallowed hard, gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. Before your dad left, before everything fell apart, I was working for a company that handled a lot of, let's just call it sensitive information. I didn't ask too many questions at first. I was just doing my job. But then, one day, I came across something I wasn't supposed to see. Documents, files, transactions that didn't make sense, large sums of money being moved around, disappearing without a trace. I started digging, trying to piece things together, and the more I found, the worse it got. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the car. Mom, I started, but she shook her head. They found out, she said, her voice tightening. I wasn't careful enough. I didn't think they were watching me, but they were. And when I got too close, they made it very clear that if I didn't stop asking questions, there would be consequences. She swallowed hard, her fingers flexing against the wheel. That's why your dad left. My heart nearly stopped. What? I breathed. He didn't leave us, she said, her voice shaking now. He left to keep us safe. My head was spinning. For years, I had believed my dad had just walked out on us, that he didn't want to be part of our lives anymore. But now she was telling me he had left because of this? Because of whatever mess she had uncovered? Why didn't you tell me? I whispered. She glanced at me, her expression softening. Because I didn't want you to grow up looking over your shoulder like I have. My chest felt tight. So all this time, I trailed off, looking down at the notebook in my lap. This is why you've been so obsessed with trying to make money online. The videos, the side jobs, all of it. You weren't just trying to make ends meet. You were trying to stay off their radar. She gave me a sad smile. I thought if I kept a low profile, if I made it look like I had moved on, they'd leave us alone. But I was wrong. They never forgot. And now they know I still have this. She nodded toward the notebook. And they want it back. My stomach turned. What's on it? She hesitated. Names, transactions, proof of what they've been doing. So why not just turn it in? I asked. Give it to the cops or something? She let out a dry, humorless laugh. You think the cops aren't already involved? I felt my blood run cold. You mean... She nodded. Some of them are on the payroll. That's why I didn't go to the police. That's why I've been holding on to this, waiting for the right moment, the right person to trust. I gripped the notebook tighter. And now they're coming after us. Yeah, she said quietly. And that's why we need your dad. I stared at her. You think he can help? I know he can, she said, determination creeping into her voice. He walked away from all of this years ago, but he still has connections. He knows people who can make this go away. If anyone can fix this, it's him. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. My dad, the man I hadn't seen in years, the man I had spent so much time resenting, was suddenly the only person who could get us out of this? It didn't feel real. Nothing about this did. But I knew one thing for sure. We didn't have a choice. We had to find him. Because if we didn't, I had a feeling we wouldn't be able to run forever. The thought made my stomach churn. I turned to look out the window, watching as the trees blurred past. The cabin was still a ways off, but I could already feel the weight of what was coming. Answers. Truths I might not be ready to hear. And whatever happened next, I knew things would never be the same again. The cabin looked exactly the same as I remembered. It had been years since I'd last seen it, but nothing had changed. The same faded wood, the same porch with the loose step that I always tripped over as a kid, the same quiet stillness that made it feel like the rest of the world didn't exist. But this time, it wasn't just a place for summer vacations and fishing trips. This time, it was the only place we had left to go. My mom pulled up the car and killed the engine, gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. She didn't move right away. She just sat there, staring at the cabin like she was preparing herself for something. Bruno let out a small whine from the back seat, shifting impatiently, his tail thumping against the seat. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "Are you sure he's here?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant for it to be. My mom nodded, still not looking at me. He wouldn't have told me to come if he wasn't. That didn't exactly make me feel better. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to feel about seeing my dad after all this time. I had spent years believing he had just left us, that he had chosen to walk away. Now I knew the truth, but that didn't make it any easier. I clenched my hands into fists, trying to steady myself. Let's get this over with. My mom finally let out a slow breath and nodded. She pushed open the car door and I followed. Bruno jumping out right after me, his tail wagging like this was just another normal trip. I wished I could feel as carefree as he did. The front door opened before we even reached it, and there he was, my dad. He looked different, older, a little more worn down than I remembered. His hair had more gray in it. His face looked more tired, but his eyes were the same. They flickered over to me for a split second before settling on my mom. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice rough. My mom crossed her arms. "I didn't have a choice." He let out a heavy sigh, stepping aside. "Come inside." My stomach twisted as I stepped past him into the cabin. The inside looked the same too. The same old couch, the same fireplace, even the same stack of books on the shelf like they had never been touched. It was like stepping into a time capsule of a life I barely remembered. My dad shut the door behind us, turning to face my mom. "Tell me everything." My mom didn't waste time. She pulled the notebook from her jacket and tossed it onto the coffee table. They came to the house. My dad's expression hardened as he picked up the notebook, flipping through the pages. "They know you have this." "They know," she said. "They were waiting." He cursed under his breath, rubbing a hand over his face. "I told you not to hold on to this. I told you to destroy it." "I couldn't," my mom snapped. "This is proof. It's the only leverage we have." "Leverage doesn't matter when you're dead," my dad shot back, his voice sharp. My stomach twisted at his words, and I saw my mom's jaw tighten. For a long moment, Neither of them spoke. Then my dad let out another breath, flipping through the notebook again. "It's worse than I thought," he muttered. "They wouldn't be this desperate unless something big was about to happen." My heart pounded harder. "So what do we do?" He glanced at me then, his gaze lingering for a second, like he was really seeing me for the first time. "We end this," he said simply. I swallowed. "How?" He closed the notebook, setting it back on the table. "I have a contact. Someone I trust. They can take this. Make sure it gets where it needs to go." My mom frowned. "You're sure we can trust them?" "As sure as I can be," my dad admitted. "But it's our best shot." My mom hesitated, then nodded. "Where?" My dad glanced at his watch. "There's a park in town. Public, busy, safe. We make the drop there." My mom and I exchanged a look. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was something. My dad didn't waste time. He grabbed a jacket, tucked the notebook under his arm, and motioned for us to follow. The drive back into town was tense. My dad drove, my mom sat in the passenger seat, and I sat in the back with Bruno, my hands gripping his fur like he was the only thing keeping me grounded. The streets blurred past, but all I could think about was what would happen if this went wrong. What if we were being watched? What if they knew we were coming? I swallowed hard, trying to push those thoughts away. Finally, my dad pulled into the parking lot of the park. It was busy, just like he said it would be. Families, joggers, people walking their dogs. It was the kind of place where no one would expect something like this to be happening. My dad parked the car but didn't turn off the engine. He turned to my mom. "You two stay here." "No way," I said immediately. He frowned. "Olivia, I deserve to see how this ends," I said firmly. "I've been dragged into this just as much as you have." He hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but stay close." My mom shot me a worried look, but I ignored it as I climbed out of the car. Bruno stuck to my side as we followed my dad through the park. He led us toward a bench where a man in a dark jacket was already sitting, casually flipping through a newspaper like he had all the time in the world. My dad didn't hesitate. He walked right up and sat down next to him. My mom and I stayed a few steps back, watching. The man barely glanced up as my dad set the notebook beside him on the bench. They exchanged a few quiet words, too low for me to hear, and then just like that, it was over. My dad stood, nodded once, and walked back toward us. The man in the dark jacket stayed put, still flipping through his newspaper like nothing had happened. My dad didn't speak until we were back at the car. "It's done," he said. My mom let out a breath, her shoulders sagging. I wasn't sure how to feel. Just like that, it was over? The thing we had been running from, the thing that had turned our lives upside down, was just gone? I sat back in my seat, staring out the window as my dad pulled out of the parking lot. The ride home was quiet. My dad didn't ask where we had been living. My mom didn't ask what he had been doing all these years, and I didn't ask what would happen next. Because honestly, I didn't know if I wanted to know. When we finally got back to the house, everything was exactly as we had left it. It felt strange, knowing that just yesterday we had been running for our lives, and now we were just here, safe. My dad stopped the car, but he didn't get out. He turned to my mom. "You should both lay low for a while." She nodded. "I know." He hesitated, then looked at me. "Take care of yourself, kid." I nodded, not sure what else to say. He gave me one last look before stepping out of the car and walking away, disappearing down the road like he had never been there at all. My mom sighed and turned to me. "Are you okay?" I let out a breath and nodded. "Yeah, I think so." Bruno barked, wagging his tail like everything was back to normal. I reached over and scratched his head. My mom let out a small laugh, the first real one in a long time. Maybe next time we should just stick to dog videos. I laughed too, shaking my head. Yeah, no more mysteries. As the sun set outside, I finally felt like I could breathe again. Maybe things wouldn't be normal right away. Maybe I still had a million questions. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a chance to start over. And for now, that was enough.